Do you think transgender is a real thing?
I mean, I don't know what that means. Do I think it's a real thing? I think there are people who suffer from a mental illness and believe that they are members of the opposite sex. I do not believe they are actually members of the opposite sex, because I think that is biologically impossible.
Okay, but you can now see why some people might say that you are espousing views that wouldn't be unsimilar in the KKK. It'd be fair to say the KKK would hold a similar view.
That's insane. I'm sorry. That's plainly insane. If the KKK thinks that the sky is blue, and the sky happens to be blue, that doesn't mean I'm a KKK sympathizer if I say the sky is blue.
And we shouldn't paint, of course, all Muslims with the brush of this terrorist. That's silly. But it is worthwhile noting that the same guy who's complaining about media coverage of Islam is the guy who drove a truck into the middle of a group of people and then started hacking away with a butcher's knife. I mean, that is worth noting. It is also worth noting that the Islamophobia narrative is a way to shut down debate. It's a way for people to simply suggest that you can't have real questions about how radical Islam works, about the ideology of radical Islam, whether it's promoting violence. You just shout Islamophobia, and that ends the conversation.
Given that there is unconscious bias, how does white privilege not
So number one, so when I speak about white privilege, yes, so when I speak about white privilege, I'm speaking specifically about behavior. Okay, there have been no studies. And really, I've looked at these studies. The connection between what they call implicit bias, this is their favorite phrase now, implicit bias, unconscious bias, and biased behavior has yet to be proven at any level that is even remotely necessary to be used in, for example, a courtroom, which is why it's never been used in a courtroom. It is also true that there is no way, there really isn't, there's been no proven way to alleviate what they call unconscious bias, which means that we're ghost hunting. So what I would suggest is that if there is unconscious bias, and I'll acknowledge the possibility or the reality of unconscious bias, if there is, then I need you to I don't care about what's in people's heads so much as what they do. So if you point me to a racist behavior, don't worry, I'll let you respond. If you point me to a racist behavior, I'm happy to stand alongside you and protest it. What I can't do is protest about things in people's head that I don't know about because I'm not a mind reader.
Okay, so that's a really interesting response, and to that I have two questions. Firstly, what I've heard you say that this is something that, the way people think doesn't affect their behavior. So that's the first thing you've said. So I'm really curious if you can kind of give me another example of a thought that somebody has which doesn't affect their behavior. Like, do people who, support Trump not vote for him? Like, I'm very curious about that.
Yes.
And secondly, so the second thing that I want to ask is that if it's something it's hard to fix, does it mean we shouldn't do anything about it? Because you said, I don't know if we can change how people think. Does that mean we shouldn't try?
I mean, first of all, not a great impression. But beyond that, my voice isn't that low. But beyond that, as far as the first question, which is, do people have thoughts that don't manifest in behavior? Yes, all the time.
For instance?
For instance, every thought that you have about walking up here and strangling me right now. I assume like we have thoughts all the time that don't manifest in behavior, and this is true every single day. We consider thoughts that cross our minds. And the problem with unconscious bias is the idea is you don't even know that you're having the thought, right? So how can you stop it if you don't even know that you're having it? But then we should be able to gauge the unconscious bias and its impact on behavior. That's why it's unconscious bias as opposed to conscious bias. The idea behind unconscious bias is that it's not even a ghost, it's a ghost of a ghost, because you don't even know you're having the thought. So people, the whole idea behind diversity training is the idea that you can retrain people to stop their chain of thought in order so that it doesn't manifest in behavior. I don't think that every thought manifests in behavior. If it did, then every time a man saw a good-looking woman walk down the street, a straight man saw a good-looking woman down the street, we'd have a real mess on our hands. So the second question, the idea was a little too broad for me to respond to, which is, just because something is tough, don't we have to face up to it? Yes, we have to face up to tough things all the time. And one of the tough things I would suggest that we face up to is that you have a lot more control over your own behavior and the decisions you make than the supposedly widespread unconscious bias of people you've never met.
There's this suffix that the left loves to add to things, and that suffix is phobia. And the reason they do that is because they want to suggest that your opposition to some activity is not rooted in reason or risk assessment. Your opposition to certain activity is rooted instead in an insane fear of things, right? So if you say that men are men and women are women, for example, and that men can't magically become women and women can't magically become men, the response of the left is not, that's scientifically false, let me explain to you how a woman is a man, because they can't do that. Instead, their response is, you're a transphobe, right? You're transphobic. I'm not afraid of transgender people. I don't know a lot of people who are afraid of transgender people. I feel horrible for transgender people. But the way that the left act, it's not, if you believe this, it's not because in any way you have science to back you, it's because you're a phobe, right? You fear. So if you are concerned about radical Islam, the left's response is, well, yeah, that's because you fear Islam. You have an irrational fear of Islam and radical Islam. First of all, fear of radical Islam is perfectly rational given the record of radical Islam around the world, to women, to gays, to people of civilized nations everywhere, to Jews, to Christians. Like, there's plenty to fear from radical Islam, obviously. But the left slaps the phobia label on there to label you pathological for having attitudes about people based on their own decision-making process. You don't want to be called pathological. You don't want to be called a weakling who lives in fear all the time. And so instead you say, okay, well, if I see somebody who may be engaged in something bad, I'm not going to report it because I don't want people labeling me an Islamophobe.
First off, try to recognize that America was never great for anyone who wasn't a white guy.
Can we all just agree that Black Lives Matter isn't the opposite of All Lives Matter?
Okay, so, sorry, Austin is running back and forth to TV screen to computer. It's amusing to watch. I'm going to continue this pattern. I love that the first gal gets up and says, can we agree America was never great for anyone who wasn't a white male? No, we can't agree on that at all. As a Jew, with ancestors who are Jews, I can pretty much agree America's the greatest country that God ever created. And by the way, for black people living in today's America, America's the greatest country that God ever created. And even during Jim Crow, America was a much better country for black people than the vast majority of countries around the world, which is not a case in favor of Jim Crow, God forbid. But to suggest that America was never great for anybody except white men is just a bunch of crap. I mean, how about white women, by the way? White women have had it better in America than any place else on earth. I mean, America is heaven for white women. I mean, white women now earn more than white men. White women are going to college at a higher rate than white men. Even in the supposedly horrific, terrible, horrible, terrible 50s, women were actually pretty happy, if you look at the polls, of female satisfaction, because they were living in a prosperous country. I mean, what a bunch of nonsense. And then this woman says, can we just agree that Black Lives Matter doesn't just mean Black Lives Matter? All Lives Matter is not a response to Black Lives Matter. No, because the entire Black Lives Matter movement is predicated on the notion that black lives are specifically under different assault than other lives in the United States by white people, and that is not true. And then I do love the fact that where they go next in this MTV video is they say, Black Lives Matter, All Lives Matter is not a proper response to Black Lives Matter, because of course all lives matter, but we're just talking about black lives now. And then the next thing they say is that not all lives matter.
I would recommend that the media sort of take a second look at how much focus they put on things like this, because the fact is that if you're going to turn it all the way up to 11 on a Hamilton tweet, this is going to be a long presidency for all of you.
Please, because 2016 is bad. 2017 can't be worse than this, all right? Because this is bad.
Okay, I'm going to listen to the black guy with the cat on his shirt telling me about what it means to be a better person because he's a black guy with a cat on his shirt. That's basically what this comes down to, right? I mean, this video comes down to, it's a bunch of not white males lecturing white males, and that's okay because they have moral superiority because they're not white males. Here's my question. What do these people actually do? Does anyone know any of these people? Like, I don't know any of these people. I don't know them from Adam. I don't care what color they are or what their sex is. It doesn't matter to me. Do they do decent things? I mean, for all I know, these people, there's a series of axe murderers that they went to San Quentin and dragged out of prison to lecture white males. The idea that these folks are granted some extra legitimacy because of their color or because of their sex, what a bunch of absolute nonsense. I also love the fact, there's an irony to the fact that you have the one guy saying, just because you don't say you have black friends, that doesn't mean that you're not a racist. And then this entire video is built around the concept that because they're showing a bunch of black people, showing some black people and some Hispanic people, some Asian people, because they're showing various diverse people, that means they can be racist against white people.
You spoke a bit about the the boost and the negation of the SAT scores that black applicants may receive with comparison to Asian people or in comparison to white people.
Yeah, I spoke about the Princeton study, correct.
And you also spoke about how there is not an equality of outcome in this nation. So with regard to this...
No, there is inequality of outcome.
Yeah.
There's no inequality of opportunity, yes.
Yes.
In the sense that there's no government obstacles. They're inequality, just to clarify before you finish the question, I promise, I'll let you finish. When I say there's no inequalities of opportunity, I obviously don't mean that we are all equally situated. I will never be an NBA basketball player. It's never going to happen. Although I could probably make the Lakers roster, they're that bad, but go ahead.
Given that you contend that there is an equality of opportunity in this nation, do you think it is right for the government to pursue, or like for federal cases to say that in some cases policies like affirmative action targeting certain ethnic groups are correct, and doing this, does it acknowledge white privilege, or do we should just leave this sort of policies totally out even though there is inequality of outcome?
No, so my answer about affirmative action and government policies that are meant to rectify these inequalities of outcome, no, I'm very much opposed to those. If you have two people who have equal SAT scores, and one of them happens to have had a bad childhood with obstacles to overcome, and one happens to have grown up in a very rich household, then that's an actual factor that has to be taken into account. But if somebody gets an SAT score that's 200 points below somebody else, and the only differentiating factor is their race, that's racism. I mean, I remember a few years back, there was a story in the Wall Street Journal about an Asian kid who got like a 1510 on his SATs when it was out of 1600, and he grew up extremely poor, single mother, it was a rough neighborhood, so he had to study in his closet for fear of gunshots and all this stuff. And he applied to Yale, didn't get in, and he didn't get in because he was Asian. If he'd been black, he would have gotten in. I mean, that sort of stuff is just racism, pure and simple. I don't understand why Colin Powell's kid is not worse off than that Asian kid was. And we're all differently situated, so let's look at each other as individuals. There's some black people who have it really bad in this country. There's some black people who have it really great in this country. There are a lot of white people who have it really bad in this country. There are more white people on food stamps than black people, by a large margin. There are more white people on welfare than black people by a large margin, which is not to suggest that black people are not on average poorer than white people, because they are. But we're going to be in a much better position to do justice when we stop focusing so much on the perversion that's known as social justice. Social justice stands in direct contravention and opposition to justice. Justice is about you take action, you get what you deserve. Social justice is about you take action, and we may or may not give you what you deserve based on what we think your social group deserves. And that's evil.
Earlier tonight, you said that Asians are the most prosperous ethnicity in America. By what metric are they by
income?
Really?
Yes.
What source?
Well, I mean, that was true as of the census tract from 2010.
Yeah. According to what source do they have the highest income?
Census.gov.
Thank you. And also, you said earlier that there's a poll that shows that black people think black people are racist.
Rasmussen poll 2013.
Thank you very much.